I'll never forget the moment I stood in that pristine principal's office, my hands trembling as Andrew Denton slid a piece of paper across the mahogany desk toward me. The document was titled Confession of Parental Negligence, and his perfectly manicured finger tapped it twice with an authority that made my stomach turn. His wife Amber sat beside him, her designer handbag worth more than 3 months of my rent, a smirk playing at the corners of her Botoxed lips. Principal Harrison wouldn't even look at me. My daughter Martha had just been suspended indefinitely from school, accused of bullying their daughter Amanda, and they wanted me to sign away my dignity to admit in writing that I was a failure as a mother. The words on that paper might as well have been a knife to my heart. I looked at Andrew's cold eyes, at Amber's contemptuous smile, at the principal's cowardly avoidance of my gaze, and something inside me cracked wide open. I thought about Martha at home clutching the torn paper butterfly she'd made for art class, the one Amanda had ripped apart in front of everyone. I thought about the 20 years I'd spent proving I didn't need anyone's help, especially not from the stepfather I'd shut out of my life. And I knew right then and there that my pride had finally led us to a place where I couldn't protect my daughter anymore. But before I tell you how we got there, before I tell you about the phone call that changed everything, I need you to do something for me. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt powerless against people who thought their money and status made them untouchable, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because you're going to want to hear how this ends. And comment below telling me about a time you had to swallow your pride for someone you loved. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really began, 3 months before that awful meeting in the principal's office. My name is Hazel Thompson, and I'm a 38-year-old single mother living in the suburbs of Chicago. More specifically, I live in a modest duplex in Naperville, the kind of place where the paint is always peeling just a little bit, and the landlord takes 3 weeks to fix anything that breaks. I work 2 jobs to make ends meet, one as a medical receptionist at a busy family practice from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, and another doing bookkeeping from home for 3 small businesses from 8 at night, and whenever I finish, usually around midnight. Sleep is a luxury I can't afford most nights, and coffee has become less of a beverage and more of a lifeline. Martha is my entire world. She's 10 years old with my dark curly hair that never quite does what we want it to, and her father's green eyes, though Marcus has been out of the picture since before she was born. He was a bartender I dated for 6 months when I was 27, charming and fun, until I told him I was pregnant, at which point he became a ghost. I haven't heard from him in over a decade, and honestly, I stopped caring about where he went years ago. What matters is that I've spent the last decade building a life for us, modest but honest, and I've done it all on my own because I refuse to be a burden to anyone. My mother, Sarah, remarried when I was 15 to William Harrington, a businessman who was already successful but not yet the billionaire he would become. At that time, he owned a mid-sized manufacturing company and a few rental properties. He was kind, patient, and clearly head over heels in love with my mother. But I never accepted him. I saw him as an intruder, someone trying to replace my father who'd died just 2 years earlier from a sudden heart attack. My real father, David Thompson, had been a high school teacher, gentle and funny, who used to read me stories every night and take me to the library every Saturday. Losing him felt like losing half of myself, and I blamed the world for taking him away too soon. My teenage anger calcified into adult stubbornness. I was cold to William at family dinners, refused to go on the vacations he planned, spent holidays at friends' houses to avoid him. My mother would beg me to give him a chance, tears in her eyes, but I was 15 and then 16 and then 17, and my grief had hardened into something ugly and immovable. When my mother was diagnosed with aggressive ovarian cancer when I was 18, just a month after my high school graduation, William was there every single day. He took her to every appointment, held her hand through every treatment, slept in a chair beside her hospital bed. And I still couldn't bring myself to thank him for it. She died 3 months after the diagnosis. And at her funeral, William tried to talk to me about staying in touch, about how we were still family. I told him we were never family, that he was just the man who married my mother, and that I didn't need or want anything from him. The hurt in his eyes should have made me feel guilty, but instead it just made me angrier. I moved out the next week, crashing on a friend's couch, determined to prove I could make it on my own. Over the years, William tried. When I struggled to pay for community college, he sent me a check for $10,000. I sent it back, torn into pieces. When Martha was born and I was living in a tiny studio apartment working as a waitress, he showed up at the hospital with flowers and a college fund he'd set up in Martha's name. I told him to leave and never come back. When I was evicted from that studio because I couldn't make rent and his lawyer somehow found out and paid my back rent, I screamed at him over the phone that I didn't want his charity and if he ever interfered in my life again, I'd get a restraining order. Looking back now, I can see how cruel I was. How much I must have hurt him with my rejection. But at the time, all I could feel was the fear that if I accepted his help, it would mean admitting my real father was truly gone, that someone else could take his place. My pride and my grief twisted together into something toxic, and I wore my independence like armor even when it was killing me. Martha started 5th grade at Riverside Elementary in September, and I was so proud that first day. She wore a new outfit I'd saved up for her backpack, full of fresh supplies, her smile bright with excitement. She'd always been a gentle kid, creative and thoughtful, the kind of child who brought home stray cats and cried during sad movies. She loved art class more than anything, spent hours at our kitchen table drawing elaborate fantasy worlds full of fairies and dragons. She had a few good friends from 4th grade, and I thought 5th grade would be wonderful for her. I noticed the changes in her almost immediately, though I didn't understand what they meant at first. She'd come home quiet, picking at her dinner instead of chattering about her day like she used to. She started spending hours in her room with the door closed, instead of showing me her latest drawings. When I asked what was wrong, she'd just shake her head and say she was tired. I chalked it up to the adjustment to a new grade, maybe a harder curriculum, maybe growing pains. I should have pressed harder. I should have known. The first real sign came in late September, just 3 weeks into the school year. I got a call at work from Mrs. Peterson, Martha's art teacher, who'd taught her in 3rd grade too and adored her. Mrs. Peterson's voice was tight with anger as she described what had happened that day. Martha had been working on a project for 2 weeks, an elaborate paper butterfly she was creating for the annual art show. She'd used origami paper in shades of purple and blue, her favorite colors, and had painted intricate patterns on the wings with watercolors. Mrs. Peterson said it was one of the most beautiful pieces she'd seen from a 5th grader in her 20 years of teaching. During class, while Martha was at the sink cleaning her brushes, a girl named Amanda Denton had walked over to Martha's desk, picked up the butterfly, and held it over her head. Martha came running back, begging Amanda to give it back, her voice getting higher and more desperate. The other students had gathered around to watch. Amanda had smiled, said something Mrs. Peterson couldn't quite hear, and then slowly, deliberately torn the butterfly in half, then in half again, and again until it was just scraps of paper falling to the floor like snow. Martha had burst into tears, the kind of sobbing that shakes your whole body, and Amanda had laughed. She'd actually laughed along with 2 other girls who seemed to be her constant companions. Then Amanda had said loud enough for everyone to hear that girls without dads were too weak to be at their school anyway, and maybe Martha should go somewhere else where she'd fit in better. Mrs. Peterson had immediately sent Amanda to the principal's office and spent 15 minutes comforting Martha in the hallway. When I called Principal Harrison after work that day, I had to wait on hold for 20 minutes before he finally picked up. He sounded harried and dismissive, like I was bothering him with something trivial. He told me he'd spoken to Amanda, who insisted it was an accident, that she'd just been trying to look at Martha's project and it had fallen apart in her hands. The other girls backed up her story. When I pointed out that Mrs. Peterson had seen the whole thing and said it was clearly deliberate, Harrison sighed and said that Mrs. Peterson was, quote, sometimes overly protective of students she favors, and that he had to consider all perspectives. He assured me he'd keep an eye on the situation, but suggested that Martha might be overly sensitive, and that I should consider whether she was mature enough to handle normal social conflicts. I hung up feeling sick to my stomach. I knew what I'd heard in his voice. Dismissal. The kind of tone people use when they've already decided you're not worth taking seriously. I found out later why. The Dentons had donated over $50,000 to the school's new gymnasium. Andrew Denton was on the school board. Amber Denton was president of the PTA. Their daughter could do no wrong because her parents' money made her untouchable. That should have been my first clue about how this would all play out, but I was naive. I thought surely if I just documented everything, if I just kept reporting incidents, someone would have to listen eventually. I didn't understand yet that the system was rigged from the start. Things escalated quickly after that, and I started keeping a journal of every incident because I needed to prove I wasn't making this up, that my daughter wasn't being overly dramatic. September 28th, Martha came home and told me that Amanda had pushed her in the hallway hard enough that she'd fallen and scraped her knee. When Martha told the hall monitor, Amanda said Martha had tripped over her own feet. October 3rd, Martha's lunch was mysteriously knocked off the table, her sandwich landing face down on the cafeteria floor. Amanda and her friends were sitting at the next table over, giggling. October 9th, Martha tried to join a group project in science class and was told by Amanda that the group was full, even though they only had 3 people and the teacher required 4. But the worst part wasn't the big incidents. It was the constant grinding daily cruelty. The whispers whenever Martha walked by. The way other kids started avoiding her because associating with her meant becoming a target too. The laughter when she raised her hand in class. The way her desk would be shoved when Amanda walked past, making Martha's pencil skitter across her paper and ruin her work. The notes left in her cubby in her desk, even once in her backpack, telling her she was ugly, stupid, unwanted, worthless. Martha started having stomachaches every morning before school, doubled over in the bathroom, begging me to let her stay home. I couldn't let her miss school. I had to work and I couldn't afford to take days off or hire a babysitter. So I'd give her Tums and tell her everything would be okay, hating myself for the lie. She started standing in front of her closet every morning, paralyzed with anxiety about what to wear because Amanda had made fun of her clothes, called them cheap and ugly, pointed out that she wore the same jeans 3 times a week. I did what I could on my limited budget. I took her to Goodwill and let her pick out some new outfits, but she cried in the dressing room because nothing fit quite right, and she knew the other kids would be able to tell they were secondhand. I started skipping lunch at work to save money, putting every extra penny toward buying Martha 1 new shirt from Target, 1 pair of name-brand sneakers, anything to give her some armor against the daily assault on her. Self-worth. But you can't buy your way out of systematic bullying, especially when you're poor and the bully is rich. I scheduled meetings with Martha's teachers, all of them going down the list one by one. Her homeroom teacher, Mr. Sanders, was sympathetic but helpless. He said he'd noticed Martha seemed withdrawn but hadn't witnessed any specific incidents himself. Her math teacher, Mrs. Lou, suggested that Martha might benefit from some social skills tutoring, as if the problem was that Martha didn't know how to make friends rather than that she was being targeted. Her English teacher barely remembered who Martha was, which was devastating because Martha loved reading and writing more than anything. I tried reaching out to other parents, the ones whose kids I'd seen playing with Martha in 4th grade. I'd see them at pickup and try to strike up conversations, casually mentioning that Martha would love to have a playdate sometime. They'd smile politely and say they'd check their schedules and get back to me, but they never did. I found out later that Amanda had told everyone that Martha was weird and mean, that she'd lied to get Amanda in trouble, and that anyone who was friends with her was basically choosing to be a loser. In late October, I saw Amber Denton at the school Halloween carnival. She was dressed as a very glamorous witch, complete with designer boots and perfectly styled hair under her pointed hat. She was surrounded by other PTA mothers, all of them laughing at something she'd said. I'd spent 2 hours making Martha's costume by hand, a fairy outfit with wings I'd constructed from coat hangers and pantyhose and glitter. Martha had loved it that morning, but after we'd been at the carnival for 20 minutes, she'd seen Amanda in a store-bought Elsa costume that probably cost $200, and suddenly my daughter's joy had evaporated. I gathered my courage and approached Amber during a moment when she was standing slightly apart from her group. I was polite, smiling, non-confrontational. I said something about how our daughters were in the same class and I'd noticed they'd had some conflicts, and I wondered if we could talk about it parent to parent and figure out a way to help them get along better. Amber had looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd discovered on the bottom of her shoe. She'd let a long, uncomfortable silence stretch out while she looked me up and down, taking in my Walmart jeans and my tired face and my discount store sweater. Then she'd smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, in a voice dripping with false sweetness, that Amanda was a perfect child who'd never hurt anyone, and perhaps if Martha was having social difficulties, I should look at what kind of example I was setting at home as a single mother, working multiple jobs, and clearly stretched too thin to properly supervise my daughter's development. She'd actually used those words. Properly supervise my daughter's development. Like Martha was a failed project, a plant I hadn't watered enough, rather than a beautiful, sensitive child being destroyed by her daughter's cruelty. Before I could respond, Amber had turned back to her group of friends and said something I couldn't quite hear that made them all laugh while glancing at me. I'd walked away with my face burning, humiliation and rage churning in my stomach, and I'd found Martha sitting alone on a bench, her fairy wings bent, watching other kids play games she was too afraid to join. November brought a cold snap that turned the world gray and dead, matching my mood. Martha's stomachaches got worse. She started having nightmares, waking up, crying, and climbing into bed with me like she hadn't done since she was 5. Her grades started slipping because she couldn't concentrate in class, always watching the door, always alert for the next attack. Her art, the one thing she'd always loved, became dark and sad. She drew pictures of girls standing alone of rain clouds and broken things, and when I asked her about them, she just shrugged. I made an appointment with the school counselor, Miss Rodriguez, hoping maybe someone trained in child psychology would take this seriously. Miss Rodriguez was kind, but ultimately useless. She talked about building resilience, about teaching Martha coping strategies, about how conflict was a normal part of growing up. She suggested some breathing exercises Martha could do when she felt anxious. She never once suggested that maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't Martha's lack of resilience, but Amanda's active cruelty. The breaking point came on a Thursday in early January, one of those bitter cold days when the wind comes off Lake Michigan like a knife. I picked Martha up from school and immediately knew something terrible had happened. She wasn't crying. She was silent, her eyes empty, her face slack. She got in the car without a word and stared straight ahead the whole drive home. When we got inside, I knelt down in front of her and took her cold hands in mine. I asked her what happened. She didn't answer at first, just started shaking. Then, in a small broken voice, she told me. Amanda and her friends had cornered Martha in the bathroom during lunch. They'd taken her backpack and dumped everything out on the floor, grinding her homework into the dirty tiles with their shoes, breaking her pencils, tearing pages out of her notebooks. They'd shoved her against the wall and told her she didn't belong at Riverside, that everyone hated her, that even her teachers thought she was pathetic. They'd said her mom was trailer trash and that's why her dad had run away before she was even born, because he'd known she'd be worthless. Martha had tried to gather up her things crawling on the bathroom floor, and they'd kicked her belongings away from her laughing. A teacher had finally come in, but by that point the girls had left, and Martha was alone on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her school supplies. The teacher had helped her clean up and sent her to the nurse's office, but no one had called me, no one had reported it, no one had done anything. When Martha finished telling me this story, she pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of her jacket pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. It was a note written in purple gel pen in that distinctive looping handwriting that girls that age have. It said, "Nobody wants you here. You're poor white trash, and your mom is a loser. Why don't you just leave? You don't have a dad because even he knew you weren't worth staying for. Do everyone a favor and disappear." I read that note 3 times, each word burning itself into my brain. Then I looked at my daughter's empty eyes and felt something fundamental break inside my chest. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was systematic psychological torture of a 10-year-old child, and every adult who was supposed to protect her had failed. That night, after I tucked Martha into bed and sang her the lullaby I used to sing when she was a baby, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision. I would document everything I had. I would present it all formally. I would demand action. And if they didn't listen, I'd find a way to make them listen. I spent hours organizing everything into a folder. Every note Martha had received, photographed and dated. A timeline of every incident I knew about. Screenshots of text messages from other parents whose children had witnessed the bullying and had quietly confirmed it to me. A list of every time I'd reported something and been dismissed. Mrs. Peterson had even given me a written statement describing the butterfly incident and several others she'd witnessed. I printed out articles about bullying prevention, about schools' legal obligations to protect students about the long-term psychological effects of this kind of harassment. When I was done at 3 in the morning, I had a 2-inch thick folder that told a devastating story of institutional failure and a child being destroyed while adults looked away. Surely this would be enough. Surely when confronted with this much evidence, they'd have to do something. I called Principal Harrison's office first thing Friday morning and demanded a meeting with him and the Dentons. His secretary tried to put me off, said everyone was very busy, maybe we could schedule something for next month. I told her if I didn't have a meeting by Monday, I'd be contacting the superintendent, the school board, and every local news station I could find. She put me on hold for 5 very long minutes, and when she came back, she said Principal Harrison could see me Monday morning at 8. I spent the weekend in a state of barely controlled panic. I rehearsed what I would say over and over, practiced. Staying calm, reminded myself to stick to the facts. I knew I was walking into a room full of people who had more power than me, more money, more connections. But I had the truth, and I had evidence, and I had the desperate love of a mother who would burn the world down to protect her child. I also knew with a sinking certainty that it probably wouldn't be enough. Sunday night I couldn't sleep. I paced my small living room looking at the pictures on the wall. Martha as a baby laughing. Martha at 6 covered in finger paint. Martha last year smiling in the sunshine back when the world still felt safe. And then I saw the photograph I kept in a drawer but had recently pulled out, the one from my mother's wedding. I was 15 in that photo, angry and sullen in my bridesmaid dress. My mother looked so happy, radiant, even despite the cancer that would take her just 3 years later. And William stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder, looking at her like she was his entire world. But what struck me now, looking at it with adult eyes, was the way he was also looking at me in that photo. There was sadness in his expression and hope and a kind of patient love that said he was willing to wait forever for me to let him in. I'd spent 20 years punishing him for not being my father. 20 years proving I didn't need him. 20 years letting my pride and grief build a wall so high I couldn't see over it anymore. And now my daughter was paying the price for my stubbornness. On the back of the photo in my mother's handwriting were words I'd read 100 times but never really understood. Family is not just blood. It's the people who refuse to give up on you. William had never given up on me. Even after I'd been cruel and rejecting and hateful, even after I'd sent back his money and told him to stay out of my life, he'd kept trying. He'd sent birthday cards for Martha every year, which I'd thrown away without opening. He'd sent Christmas presents, which I'd donated. He'd called on the anniversary of my mother's death every year, and I'd let it go to voicemail. But he'd never stopped trying. What kind of man does that? What kind of love persists through 20 years of rejection? I looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd never deleted but never called. William's name stared back at me. My finger hovered over it for a long time. Part of me was still that angry 15-year-old insisting I didn't need anyone. Part of me was the stubborn single mother who'd built her entire identity on doing everything alone. But a bigger part of me was a mother watching her daughter drown and finally admitting I couldn't save her by myself. I thought about Martha asking if she was a burden. I thought about that note telling her to disappear. I thought about the empty look in her eyes. And I pressed dial. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Maybe he'd changed his number. Maybe he wouldn't answer. Maybe he'd finally given up on me after all these years, and I wouldn't blame him if he had. On the 4th ring, a deep, familiar voice answered. Hazel. I hadn't expected him to have my number saved after all these years. I hadn't expected him to sound so alert despite the late hour. I hadn't expected the way just hearing him say my name would make my throat close up with emotion. Hazel, is that you? Are you all right? And then, like a dam breaking, it all came pouring out. I told him everything, the words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush that probably didn't make much sense. I told him about Amanda Denton and the torn butterfly and the endless cruelty. I told him about Principal Harrison's dismissal and Amber Denton's contempt and my useless meetings with teachers who wouldn't help. I told him about the bathroom incident and the note and Martha's empty eyes. I told him about the meeting I had scheduled for Monday morning, about the document they'd probably try to make me sign, about how I knew I was going to lose because they had all the power and I had none. I told him I'd tried to handle it alone and I'd failed. I told him I was sorry for being so stubborn, sorry for pushing him away, sorry for taking 20 years to ask for help. I told him I knew I had no right to call him after everything I'd done, but my daughter was drowning and I didn't know what else to do. When I finally ran out of words, there was silence on the other end. Not the cold silence of rejection, but something different. Something that felt like a gathering storm. Then William spoke, and his voice was like ice and steel and barely contained fury. Hazel, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are my daughter. You have always been my daughter, whether you acknowledged me or not. Martha is my granddaughter. What you've just described is not a conflict between children. It's not kids being kids. It's systematic abuse being enabled by people who should know better. And I will not tolerate it for one more second. William, I'm not asking for money, I said quickly, old habits dying hard even now. I needed to tell someone. I needed someone to know that I tried, that I did everything I could think of. Tomorrow I'm going to go into that meeting and they're going to make me sign something awful and suspend Martha, and there's nothing I can do to stop them because this isn't about money, he cut me off, his voice sharp as a blade. This is about family. This is about people who think their wealth gives them the right to torment a child, to humiliate her mother, to abuse their power without consequence. They have made a fatal mistake. They hurt someone I love, and they're about to learn exactly how serious an error that was. William Andrew Denton is a partner at Keller Morrison & Stern. They're one of the biggest law firms in the state. Amber Denton is on the board of half the organizations in DuPage County. They have money and connections, and I know exactly who Andrew Denton is, William said, and there was something in his tone that made me shiver. I know what firm he works for, what boards his wife sits on, how much they donated to Riverside Elementary, and exactly what makes them feel untouchable. I also know every single one of their vulnerabilities, every pressure point, every leverage I can apply. Hazel, I've been building businesses and navigating power structures for 40 years. The Dentons think they're powerful because they have money and local influence. They're about to learn the difference between being a big fish in a small pond and dealing with someone who operates on a completely different level. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had softened slightly, but the steel underneath remained. Hazel, I want you to promise me something. Do not sign anything tomorrow. Do not agree to anything. Do not accept any deals or compromises. Do you understand? Yes, but what are you? I'll be there tomorrow morning. What time is your meeting? 8 o'clock. I'll pick you up at 7:15. We're going to that school together, and this ends tomorrow. Do you trust me? It was the question I should have been able to answer yes to 20 years ago. The question I should have been able to answer 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even a year ago. But I'd been too stubborn, too proud, too afraid that trusting him meant betraying the memory of my real father. Now, at almost midnight on a Sunday in January, with my daughter's life falling apart and my own strength completely exhausted, I finally knew the answer. Yes, I whispered. I trust you. Good. Hazel, I need you to understand something else. You didn't fail. Do you hear me? You've been protecting Martha on your own for 10 years, working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything for her, and you've done a remarkable job. The people who failed here are the adults at that school who looked away while a child was tortured. The people who failed are the Dentons who raised a bully and then protected her cruelty. You did everything a mother should do. You fought for your daughter every way you knew how. But you don't have to fight alone anymore. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face in the dark of my kitchen. I should have called you years ago. You called when you were ready. That's what matters. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we remind those people that money and status don't make you untouchable. Being on the right side does. After he hung up, I sat there holding my phone for a long time, feeling like I'd just stepped off a cliff into free fall. I'd broken my cardinal rule. I'd asked for help. From William, of all people, the man I'd spent 2 decades keeping at arm's length. But as terrified as I was of what that meant for my carefully constructed independence, I was more terrified of doing nothing while Martha suffered. And somewhere deep down beneath the fear and the pride and the long habit of going it alone, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I barely slept that night. What little rest I got interrupted by dreams of tomorrow's meeting, that somehow all ended with me being the one punished. At 5 in the morning, I gave up and made coffee, then spent 2 hours trying to make myself look presentable. I chose my best outfit, the navy pantsuit I saved for job interviews, and did my makeup carefully, trying to hide the exhaustion and fear. Martha woke up at 6:30, confused about why we were both dressed up so early on a Monday. Are we going somewhere special? She asked, still groggy. I knelt down to her level, taking her hands. We're going to the school today, sweetheart. With someone who wants to help us. Another teacher. No, baby. Your grandfather. Martha's eyes went wide. She'd seen photos, knew vaguely that my mother had remarried before she died, but I'd never talked about William. Never explained why she didn't have grandparents on my side, beyond saying it was complicated. I have a grandfather. Her voice was small, uncertain, like she was afraid to hope for something good. You do. And he loves you very much, even though you haven't met him yet. He's going to make sure you're safe at school. Can he really do that? The skepticism in her voice broke my heart. My 10-year-old daughter had already learned not to trust that adults would protect her. Yes, I said firmly, praying I was right. He can. I promise. At 7:10, I was standing at the window watching the street with my stomach in knots. At 7:15, exactly, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up in front of our duplex. It was the kind of car that looked out of place in our neighborhood, where most vehicles were at least 10 years old and showing rust around the edges. William got out of the driver's seat and my breath caught. I hadn't seen him in person in 20 years, only in photos that occasionally appeared in business articles I sometimes looked up late at night when I couldn't sleep, though I'd never admitted that to anyone. He was 70 now, his hair silver but still thick, his posture straight and commanding. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, tailored perfectly to his frame. Even from a distance, I could see the authority radiating from him, the kind of presence that made people instinctively straighten up and pay attention. This wasn't the man I'd rejected 20 years ago. This was William Harrington, billionaire businessman, philanthropist, member of a dozen prestigious boards, a man who'd built an empire and wielded power that people like the Dentons could barely imagine. And he was here because I'd finally asked. I opened the door before he could knock. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other across the threshold and 20 years of distance. Up close, I could see the lines on his face, the marks of age and stress, and probably grief over the daughter who'd rejected him for so long. But his eyes were the same as I remembered, sharp and intelligent, and despite everything kind. "Hello, Hazel," he said softly, and the gentleness in his voice almost undid me. "Hi," I whispered, not trusting myself to say more. Then he looked past me to where Martha stood nervously in the hallway, half hidden behind my leg. His entire expression transformed something like wonder and joy and sadness all mixed together. He took a slow step forward, moving carefully like he was afraid of scaring her. "And you must be Martha." Martha nodded, her fingers gripping the back of my shirt. William crouched down slowly to her level, which must have been difficult at his age, but his focus was entirely on her. "I'm your grandfather, William. I know this is probably confusing, and you and I have a lot of catching up to do. But right now I need you to know something very important. What's happening to you at school is wrong. The way those people have treated you and your mother is wrong. And I'm going to make sure it stops today. Can you be brave for a little while longer?" Martha looked at me, then back at William. "Are you really going to help us?" "I really am. And I give you my word, Martha, that no one is going to hurt you again. Not while I'm here." Something in his voice, some absolute certainty, made Martha's shoulders relax slightly. She nodded. "That's my girl, William," said, standing up with a slight wince. He turned to me. "Ready?" "I don't know what you're planning," I said, quietly aware of Martha listening to every word, "but you need to understand what we're walking into. Andrew Denton is ruthless. He's used to winning. Amber Denton has the entire PTA wrapped around her finger. Principal Harrison is basically in their pocket. They're going to have prepared for this. They're going to have arguments ready. They're going to try to intimidate us and—" Hazel, William interrupted gently, putting his hand on my shoulder. "You've been fighting this battle alone with no weapons and no support, and you've still managed to hold your ground. That takes incredible strength. But now you're not alone, and I have weapons they can't even imagine. Trust me. We got Martha settled at my neighbor Mrs. Chen's house, and then William drove us to Riverside Elementary. The ride was mostly silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I kept glancing over at him, trying to reconcile this powerful, commanding man with the stepfather I'd rejected so long ago. He'd catch me looking and give me a small, reassuring smile that reminded me he was still the same person who'd loved my mother, who'd tried for years to be there for me, who'd waited patiently for 20 years for me to finally let him in. As we pulled into the school parking lot at exactly 7:50, I could see people staring. Parents dropping off their kids for before-school programs, teachers arriving for the day, all of them stopping to look at the expensive car and the distinguished older man getting out of it. William came around and opened my door, offering me his hand. I took it, and his grip was firm and steadying. "Head high," he murmured. "They don't get to see you ashamed anymore. You have nothing to be ashamed of." We walked into the school side by side, and I felt like I was in a movie. People literally turned to watch us pass. A few teachers who'd ignored my emails suddenly looked very interested in talking to me. William's hand stayed on my shoulder, a steady reminder that I wasn't alone this time. The secretary at the front desk, a woman named Carol, who'd been coolly dismissive every time I'd called, looked up and her eyes went wide. The color drained from her face, and she stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Mr. Harrington," she breathed like she was seeing a celebrity. "I didn't know you were. I mean, no one told me you'd be. Is there something I can—" "I'm here for the 8 o'clock meeting with Principal Harrison and the Dentons," William said calmly. "Regarding my granddaughter Martha Thompson's suspension." Your granddaughter Carol looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, her expression shifting from dismissal to confusion to something that might have been fear. I could practically see her mentally recalculating everything she'd assumed about me. "That's correct. Please let Principal Harrison know that William Harrington is here along with his daughter Hazel Thompson. We'll be waiting in his office." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact delivered in a tone that made it clear he expected immediate compliance. Carol practically tripped over herself, reaching for the phone. William led me through the main hallway like he owned the place, which I realized he sort of did. He'd funded the renovation of this building 5 years ago, had his name on a plaque in the main entrance that I'd walked past 100 times without really seeing. We went straight to Principal Harrison's office and walked in without knocking. Harrison looked up from his computer, startled coffee mug halfway to his lips. When he saw William, he choked, slightly sputtering, and set the mug down so hard coffee sloshed over the rim. Mr. Harrington. I wasn't. Carol didn't. If I'd known you were coming, I would have. He stood up, wiping his hands nervously on his pants, his face cycling through several shades of red. You weren't informed because I chose not to inform you, William said, his tone cordial, but with an edge underneath like a blade wrapped in silk. He settled into one of the chairs across from Harrison's desk without being invited and gestured for me to take the other. I received a disturbing phone call last night from my daughter Hazel regarding the treatment she and her daughter Martha have been receiving at this institution. I decided it warranted my immediate personal attention. Your daughter Harrison's eyes darted to me, confusion and dawning panic warring on his face. Miss Thompson, I didn't realize you had. That is, I was under the impression. Hazel is my stepdaughter, which makes her my daughter in every way that matters, William said, his voice cooling several degrees. Her daughter Martha is my granddaughter. And I understand you've suspended Martha based on complaints from the Denton family without apparently investigating the systematic bullying she's been subjected to for months. Harrison swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Mr. Harrington, it was a very difficult situation. There were allegations from both sides, and we had to consider all the evidence. The Dentons provided statements from multiple students, and we have a responsibility to protect all your students, not just the ones whose parents can afford generous donations, William finished for him. Tell me, Principal Harrison, how much did the Dentons contribute to the new gymnasium? Harrison went pale. I don't think that's relevant to $50,000 if I recall correctly. And Andrew Denton is on the school board. Amber Denton is PTA president. They're very involved in the school community. Well, yes, but that doesn't mean... It means, William said, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous, that when faced with evidence of their daughter's bullying, you chose to side with them because it was financially and politically convenient. You ignored reports from teachers, dismissed Hazel's documented evidence, and ultimately decided to punish the victim to avoid offending your donors. That's not. I would never. Harrison was sweating now, his tie suddenly too tight. The door opened, and Andrew and Amber Denton walked in, still radiating that entitled confidence that came from never being told no. They were dressed impeccably amber in cream Chanel and pearls, Andrew in a suit probably worth $5,000. They looked like they were walking into a meeting they'd already won. Harrison, what's this about? Andrew started, his voice carrying that irritated authority he probably used in court. Your secretary was practically incoherent on the phone, babbling something about... He stopped mid-sentence when he saw William. Just stopped like someone had hit a pause button. His eyes went wide, then narrow, and I watched his lawyer brain start processing information at high speed. Amber looked confused for a second, then followed her husband's gaze. William Harrington, Andrews said slowly, carefully, like he was navigating a minefield. I didn't realize you were involved in this matter. I wasn't, William said, not bothering to stand or offer his hand. Until approximately 12 hours ago, when my daughter called me in tears to tell me that you and your wife have been systematically tormenting my granddaughter and attempting to intimidate Hazel into accepting false blame for your daughter's bullying behavior. I watched the blood drain from Amber's face as comprehension hit. She looked at me, then at William, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Andrew's jaw tightened, but he was a lawyer trained to recover quickly. Mr. Harrington, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your daughter. He looked at me with barely concealed shock, and I thought a flash of fear. Miss Thompson is your daughter. Hazel is my stepdaughter, but I consider her my daughter. Martha is my granddaughter. And you two have made what I can only describe as a catastrophic error in judgment. Amber found her voice, though it came out higher than usual. I don't understand. You're Hazel's. But she never said. Why wouldn't she mention that she? Because I didn't want to mention it, I said, speaking up for the first time since entering the office. My voice came out stronger than I felt. Because I've been taking care of Martha on my own for 10 years, and I wanted to keep doing that. But you people left me no choice. This is ridiculous, Amber said, but her voice lacked its usual contempt. She looked at her husband uncertainly. Andrew, surely we can all sit down and discuss this rationally. There's no need for... There's nothing to discuss, William cut her off. Here's what's going to happen, and these aren't negotiable terms. First, Principal Harrison is going to immediately rescind Martha's suspension effective retroactively, with a formal written apology for the school's failure to protect her from systematic bullying. Harrison opened his mouth to protest, but William's look silenced him. Second, you and your husband are going to provide written apologies to both Hazel and Martha, taking full responsibility for your daughter Amanda's behavior and your own unconscionable actions in trying to intimidate them. These apologies will be specific, detailed, and sincere. We'll do no such thing, Amber sputtered. Our daughter has done nothing wrong, and we certainly don't owe. William continued as if she hadn't spoken. Third, Amanda will be suspended for 1 week and required to attend mandatory anti-bullying counseling before returning to school. During that counseling, she will address her behavior specifically toward Martha, and the counselor will provide a written assessment of her progress. When she returns to school, she will have no direct contact with Martha whatsoever. If she is in the same classroom, she will be seated as far away as possible. If they are in the same hallway, she will choose a different route. This non-contact provision will remain in effect for the remainder of the school year. That's absurd, Andrew said, shifting into his attorney mode, his voice taking on the commanding tone he probably used to intimidate opposing counsel. You can't dictate terms like this. We have rights, our daughter has rights, and frankly, Mr. Harrington, I don't care how much money you have. This is a legal matter now, and I'm more than prepared to. Fourth, William said, his voice dropping to something cold and final, you will make a public statement to the school community acknowledging that the accusations against Martha were false and based on a misunderstanding of the situation. This statement will be sent to every family at Riverside Elementary. Absolutely not, Andrew said flatly. I'm not admitting to anything. And if you think you can bully us into... Let me be very clear about something, William said, standing up slowly. He wasn't a particularly tall man, but somehow he seemed to fill the room and everyone shrank back slightly. These are my terms. You can accept them right now, this moment, or I will proceed to option 2. And I promise you none of you want option 2. What's option 2? Amber demanded, trying to sound defiant but coming off shrill instead. Option 2 is that I hold a press conference this afternoon. I invite every news outlet in Chicago, every education reporter, every local television station. I present all the evidence Hazel has compiled, every note, every report, every dismissed complaint. I bring in Martha and have child psychologists testify about the harm systematic bullying causes. I detail exactly how this school, under Principal Harrison's leadership, chose to protect a bully and punish her victim because it was financially convenient. Harrison made a strangled sound. Andrew's face had gone from red to white. I will personally ensure that the Denton name becomes synonymous with enabling child cruelty. Amber, you'll find yourself quietly removed from every board and committee you currently sit on. No one will want to be associated with the woman who defended her daughter tormenting a child. Andrew, your firm will be very interested to learn that one of their partners is generating negative publicity by using his position to intimidate a single mother and her 10-year-old daughter. I imagine Keller, Morrison, and Stern will ask you to resign to protect their reputation. Andrew opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He was a lawyer, but he was a local lawyer used to local power structures. He was suddenly realizing he was completely outmatched. William wasn't done. I will then file a civil suit against you both personally, not against Amanda, but against you, for defamation, intentional, infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to deny Martha her right to education in a safe environment. I will hire the best lawyers money can buy, which happens to be significantly better than the lawyers you can afford, Andrew, regardless of your position at your firm. This lawsuit will be long, expensive, and very, very public. Every humiliating detail will be dragged out in discovery and depositions. Your finances will be examined. Your parenting will be questioned. Your daughter will be forced to testify about her actions. You can't, Amber started, but her voice was barely a whisper now. I absolutely can, William said. And I will. I will dedicate whatever resources are necessary to ensure that you understand the consequences of using power to hurt those you perceive as weak and unprotected. Because here's what you failed to understand. Hazel and Martha are not weak, and they are certainly not unprotected. They're my family, and I protect my family. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on Harrison's wall, could hear someone walking down the hallway outside, could hear Amber's shallow, panicked breathing. There's a third option, William continued, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its steel. A nuclear option, if you will. I could simply buy this school. The property, the building, everything. I have the resources to make Riverside Elementary a private institution, at which point I would have complete control over admissions. I could ensure Amanda is expelled. I could ensure Principal Harrison is terminated. I could restructure the entire administration. It would be expensive and time-consuming, but I'm retired, wealthy, and motivated. How motivated? I'm protecting my granddaughter. So you tell me how far you think I'm willing to go. That seemed to be the blow that finally shattered Andrew's composure. His lawyer's mask cracked, and I saw real fear underneath. He looked at his wife, who was staring at William like he was a natural disaster bearing down on them. Mr. Harrington, Andrew said, and his voice was different now, careful, almost pleading, surely we can come to some reasonable accommodation here. There's no need for this to escalate to. I gave you my terms, William said. They're reasonable, fair, and honestly more generous than you deserve. You have until I walk out that door to accept them. After that, I proceed with option 2 and possibly 3. He looked at his watch. You have 30 seconds. This is extortion, Amber said, desperately looking at her husband. Andrew, this is illegal. You can't just threaten people like this. Tell him he can't. It's not extortion, Andrew said quietly, and he suddenly looked 10 years older. He's not threatening to do anything illegal. He's threatening to use his legal rights and his resources to pursue legitimate claims. And he can do it. God help us, he can do it. Andrew Amber grabbed his arm. You're just going to let him. 15 seconds, William said. We accept, Andrew said, the words coming out flat and defeated. Andrew, no. We can't just... We accept your terms, Mr. Harrington. All of them. Amber looked like she'd been slapped. I can't believe you're just giving in to him. We have rights. Our daughter has rights. This is America, and just because he's rich doesn't mean... It means exactly that Andrew cut her off harshly. It means he has the resources to destroy us, and he will because we hurt someone he loves. So, yes, we're accepting his terms, and you're going to shut up and be grateful he's giving us a way out that doesn't involve our faces plastered across every news outlet in the state. I'd never seen Amber Denton look so shocked. She sat down hard in one of the chairs, her face crumpling, and for a second I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. William turned to Principal Harrison, who looked like he might throw up. Principal Harrison, I'll need that written rescission of Martha's suspension and your apology within the hour. Yes, Mr. Harrington. Of course. Immediately. And Principal Harrison, I'll be taking a much more active role in the school board going forward. I think it's time I attended. Some meetings got more involved in policy decisions, ensured that the school I helped fund is actually protecting all its students, not just the convenient ones. You'll be seeing a lot more of me. Harrison nodded miserably. William looked at the Dentons. Your written apologies by end of business today. The public statement by tomorrow. Amanda's suspension starts immediately. Any questions? They both shook their heads, Amber looking like she was fighting tears, Andrew staring at his hands. Good, William said. He turned to me and offered his arm. Hazel, let's go get some breakfast. Let these people figure out how to do the right thing for once in their lives. I stood on shaky legs and took his arm. My hands were trembling, my heart racing, but underneath the adrenaline was something else. Something that felt like vindication, like justice, like the first full breath I'd taken in months. As we walked toward the door, William paused and looked back. One more thing. If I hear about any retaliation against Martha or Hazel, if I hear about any subtle attempts to make their lives difficult, if I hear about anything less than complete professional courtesy and support, I won't bother with warnings. I'll just proceed directly to option 3. Do we understand each other? 3 heads nodded frantically. We walked out of that office down the hallway through the main entrance of Riverside Elementary. People stared, whispered, watched us pass. William kept his hand on my shoulder steady and sure, and I kept my head high. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. In the parking lot, I finally let myself react. I leaned against William's car and started crying huge, gasping sobs that I couldn't control. All the fear and stress and exhaustion and humiliation of the past months came pouring out. William didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug and let me cry on his expensive suit until I was done. When I finally got myself under control, I looked up at him with a wet, snotty face and said, I'm sorry. For what? For 20 years. For being cruel to you. For pushing you away. For not giving you a chance. For making you wait so long to meet your granddaughter. For... Hazel, he said gently, you were a child dealing with grief and loss in the only way you knew how. And then you were a young woman trying to survive and protect your daughter. You don't owe me an apology. I just wish you'd felt like you could call sooner. I was so stupid. My pride almost... Your pride kept you going when you had no one else. It helped you survive. It got you through 10 years of single motherhood while working 2 jobs. Pride isn't always a bad thing. It only becomes a problem when it stops us from accepting the help we need. He opened the car door for me. Now let's go get Martha from Mrs. Chen's house and take her somewhere fun. I think we all need to remember what joy feels like. And then if you're willing, I'd like to start getting to know my granddaughter properly. We picked up Martha and I watched as William crouched down and told her that everything was fixed, that she was safe now, that she could go back to school without being afraid. Martha looked at me for confirmation, and I nodded, tears streaming down my face again. Then Martha did something that broke my heart in the best possible way. She threw her arms around William and said, "Thank you, Grandpa." William's arms came around her, and I saw tears on his face too. This tough, powerful man who just methodically dismantled the people who hurt us was crying while hugging a 10-year-old girl he'd just met. And I realized that this was who he'd always been under the suits and the power and the money. Someone who loved fiercely and protected those he cared about and never gave up even when he had every reason to. We spent the rest of that day together, the 3 of us. William took us to the American Girl store, where Martha's eyes went wide at the displays, and he bought her the doll she'd been wanting forever, plus enough accessories to fill 3 shopping bags. We went to a fancy restaurant for lunch where I felt out of place, but William treated the staff with the same respect he showed everyone, and they clearly adored him. We walked along the lakefront even though it was cold, and William told Martha stories about my mother, her grandmother Sarah, and I cried again, hearing about moments I'd forgotten. That evening, William drove us home to our modest duplex, and I felt embarrassed about the peeling paint and the tiny living room, but he didn't seem to notice or care. He asked Martha about her artwork, and she shyly showed him some of her drawings. He looked at each one carefully and told her she had real talent, that he'd love to help her develop it if she was interested. Maybe some art classes or a summer program, whatever she wanted. When Martha went to her room to put away her new things, William and I sat at my kitchen table. It was the same table where I'd made the decision to call him less than 24 hours ago, though it felt like a lifetime. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you and Martha live your lives without fear," he said simply. "Martha goes back to school tomorrow. The Dentons will leave you alone, trust me. Principal Harrison will be very attentive to Martha's well-being. And you and I start rebuilding a relationship if you're willing." "I don't deserve." "Stop," he said, firmly but kindly. "You deserve to be supported. You deserve to have family in your corner. You deserve to let someone help carry the weight instead of doing it all yourself. Your mother used to say that the strongest people aren't the ones who never ask for help, they're the ones who know when to reach out." She was right. "I miss her," I whispered. "I do too. Every day. But she would be so proud of you, Hazel. Proud of the mother you've become, proud of the daughter you raised, proud that you finally let me be here for you." That took more courage than going it alone ever did. Over the following days, the pieces fell into place exactly as William had promised. Principal Harrison hand-delivered Martha's reinstatement letter and a formal apology that was detailed and abject. The Dentons provided written apologies that, while clearly painful for them to write, acknowledged their daughter's behavior and their own failings. Amanda served her suspension and entered counseling. The public statement went out to all Riverside Elementary families, and while it was carefully worded, the message was clear: the accusations against Martha had been false. The social dynamics at school shifted dramatically. Teachers who'd ignored Martha before suddenly took an interest in her welfare. Other students, sensing that the power structure had changed, started including her again. The parents who'd avoided me before now smiled and said hello at pickup. It was amazing and a little sickening how quickly people's attitudes changed once they understood that I wasn't some struggling single mother, with no connections but the daughter of William Harrington. But the most important change was in Martha herself. She started smiling again, real smiles that reached her eyes. She brought home artwork she was proud of. She made new friends. She stopped having nightmares. One night, about a month after everything happened, she came to my room before bed and said, "Mom, I don't feel scared anymore." Those 5 words made everything worth it. The years of pride I'd swallowed. The help I'd finally accepted. The vulnerability of letting William back into our lives. William became a constant presence, but in the best possible way. He never tried to take over or control our lives. He'd come over for dinner once a week, always bringing something Martha loved, always asking about her day, always treating her like she was the most important person in the world. He paid off my medical bills without asking permission first, and when I started to protest, he reminded me that family helps family, and he had more money than he could ever spend anyway, so I could either accept it gracefully or he'd just donate an equivalent amount to charity in my name. I chose acceptance. He offered me a better job in one of his companies, something in administration with better pay and regular hours, but I told him I wanted to keep my independence, at least for now. He grumbled about my stubbornness being genetic, but respected my choice. He did, however, set up a college fund for Martha that made me cry when I saw the amount, and he started teaching Martha about art and business and the world in a way that made her eyes light up. 6 months after that awful meeting in Principal Harrison's office, we celebrated Martha's 11th birthday with the first real party she'd ever had. William rented out a space at a children's museum, invited Martha's whole class, hired entertainers, ordered a 3-tier cake. It was extravagant and joyful and everything a child's birthday should be. But the best moment wasn't the bouncy castle or the presents or the fancy decorations. It was watching Martha confident and happy laughing with her friends. It was seeing her run up to William and throw her arms around him, calling him Grandpa without hesitation or awkwardness. It was the way she introduced him to her friends with pride, saying, "This is my grandfather, and he's really cool." It was feeling like we were finally, after all these years, a complete family. That night after the party, when it was just the 3 of us cleaning up, William said something that I'll carry with me forever. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Hazel. She always said you were the strongest person she knew, but that you just needed to learn that strength doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means knowing when to let the people who love you stand beside you. I think you figured that out now." I looked at him, this man I'd rejected for 20 years, who'd never stopped trying, who'd waited patiently for me to be ready, and I realized that I had learned. Not just about accepting help, but about what family really means. It's not about blood or obligation. It's about showing up. It's about refusing to give up on the people you love, even when they push you away. It's about using whatever power you have to protect the ones who matter. The Dentons left Riverside Elementary the following year. I heard through the grapevine that Andrew's firm had encouraged him to relocate to their California office, which was code for getting him as far away from local publicity as possible. Amber quietly resigned from her boards and committees, and they moved to Los Angeles without fanfare. I felt a little bad for Amanda sometimes. She was just a kid who'd been taught that money and status made her better than others, and now she was paying for her parents' failings. But mostly I felt relieved that she was gone and Martha could heal without constant reminders. Martha is 13 now, thriving in middle school, involved in art club and creative writing. She's talked about becoming a teacher someday because she wants to help kids who feel invisible, kids who feel like they don't matter. She has her grandfather's determination and her mother's fierce heart and her grandmother's kindness. She knows her worth now, knows she's loved and protected, knows she never has to face the world alone. As for me, I'm still a work in progress. I've learned to accept help without seeing it as charity or weakness. I've learned that my worth doesn't depend on doing everything alone, that asking for support doesn't make me less independent or capable. I've learned that the wall I built around my heart to protect myself from getting hurt had really just locked me in a prison of my own making. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to let people love you. Never too late to admit you were wrong. Never too late to accept the family that's been waiting for you all along. William walked Martha through her 8th grade promotion ceremony last month because her school does this thing where important people in your life can participate. Martha had asked him without hesitation, and he'd cried when he said yes. I watched this powerful man who commanded boardrooms and made billionaires nervous get teary-eyed over middle school promotion, and I thought about how far we'd all come. About how close I'd been to losing everything because I was too proud to ask for help. About how my stubbornness almost cost Martha her childhood and her sense of safety. But we made it through. Not because I was strong enough to do it alone, but because I finally learned that I didn't have to be. They told me my daughter couldn't come back to school until I admitted I was a failure as a mother. But I came back with a father instead. A father who taught me that family isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about being there when it matters, about using whatever power you have to protect the people you love, about refusing to let anyone make them feel small or worthless. And with that kind of love standing behind you, no bully, no matter how rich or powerful, can make you fall. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to swallow your pride to protect someone you love? Have you ever realized that the walls you built to keep people out were really just keeping you trapped? Have you ever learned that asking for help is the bravest thing you can do, not the weakest? Drop your story in the comments below. Like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe to hear more stories about people who found the courage to change their lives. Because sometimes the hardest battles we fight aren't against the people trying to hurt us, but against our own fear of being vulnerable enough to let someone help us win.